The American wing at the Met is at the very center of the understanding of this museum, of the understanding of the genesis of this great institution, and also for the understanding of how American art and how American culture came into being. And it allows you to appreciate American art at its best and American history at its most complex.
The American Wing is the Met's historical collection of American art, that is American decorative arts and fine arts, painting, sculpture, works on paper, broadly from the mid-17th century to the mid-20th century. It was founded in 1924 as a department of historical decorative arts, primarily furniture. And when you came in 1924, what you would have seen were these rather innovative settings of so-called period rooms or historical interiors. We're marking the 100th anniversary of the wing, and in that time, really focusing more on the collection and how the collection has evolved. We've been just seeing how far we've come in 100 years.
And what I find so fascinating, as someone who, of course, comes from Europe, it is a way to get to know American art and culture. For an international audience to really experience American art in all its development, in all its complexity, in all its diversity.
The American Wing was founded during a really extraordinary colonial revival zeitgeist that was crossing the nation. And this interest in telling certain histories of this country, certain British American histories, as a way to introduce and build identity, actually, for newly arrived Americans. That was our founding mission in 1924. It was obviously a more narrow focus on what was American. And in the 20s, that meant British America. So that's what's so exciting to think about over these different decades, how we've continued to broaden the collection, bringing fine arts, quote, painting, sculpture, drawings into the realm of the decorative arts as well. And here we are, in fact, our first artifact, Martin Thompson's second bank of the US down on Wall Street.
How meaningful, of course, as well, not only as a neoclassicist facade, as a preservationist idea, but also it's a bank.
Yes,
right?
exactly.
So you are in New York, you are at the center of also capitalism, right? And this is the entry towards the American wing, the entry towards the idea of American culture.
Robert DeForest, who was the president of the Met when he saved this facade, had this vision that this would be the entrance to what is still the core of the American wing. We still honor that history because, it defines us still. But of course, what's inside those galleries now is far more diverse, far more complicated, really looking at those challenging histories in fresh ways. The American Wing at 100, this major centennial reinstallation project, actually has three components. The first was a reinstallation of our founding collection of 18th century furniture called the Calculative Curve. The second is new introductory welcoming galleries on the first floor. And then the third part is a refresh and a reinterpretation of the second floor painting and sculpture galleries.
This is the gallery that welcomes visitors to the American Wing, and here for the first time we're showing the full range of types of works of art that are on display throughout the American Wing.
We are looking at works that range from the early 18th century up through the middle of the 20th century.
This gallery invites interrogation about what it is to be American and what is American art.
Some of these objects have been in the wing since its founding in the 1920s. Others are very recent acquisitions, and we really wanted to put them all into this new context. Here we're looking at a massive jar by the enslaved potter Dave Drake. This was made in 1858, so at the height of slavery in this country. And he was one of hundreds of enslaved potters working and laboring in the potteries in the old Edgefield district in western South Carolina. You can see right away his knowledge of the material, his technical skill. But what's most incredible about this work is the fact that he was literate when most of the other enslaved potters working in Edgefield were not permitted to read and write. And here you have the longest known poem to date by Dave. And you can see the declaration of authorship right in the center here. This storage jar was acquired by the Met in 2020. And the fact that we are now showing a work made by an identified enslaved maker allows us to tell these much broader stories about the history of art and making in this country.
So this fluted silver teapot was made in the shop of Paul Revere, a figure who's well known for his role in American history and in the American Revolution. It was part of our founding collection of silver. It has been in the American Wing from the beginning. Up until very recently, this was shown as part of our silver collections so that people could look at the evolution of style and making techniques. And in this installation, it's juxtaposed with works like the Dave jar that allow us to ask very different questions about it.
Yeah, it's fascinating that here we have a Revere teapot, this well-known figure in American history, sharing this space with artists whose names we're just learning.
But that does capture what's happening in this gallery, that we take works that have long been treasured and important parts of our collection and put them together with new acquisitions. The narratives we're exploring are expanding and becoming more complicated and richer in the process.
There are 20 period rooms in the American wing. They span in time from about 1680 to 1915. They show the lives and interiors of people from farmers to well-to-do New Yorkers, founding fathers, immigrants. You can experience the history of interior decorating and interior design in America through 3 centuries. There would be no American wing without the period rooms. The conception of the American wing in 1924 was to show rooms. It was at a moment where there was a lot of immigration into New York. And so what they were doing in the American wing was showing these new immigrants how it was to be an American. Over the last 10 years, it became very clear that a lot of our rooms, especially the southern rooms, had no representation of people who lived there. So now we're trying to show a much broader picture of the stories of the people who had no voice, who were enslaved or indentured, and the women who also contributed to the larger stories. This is the Richmond Room, built in Richmond, Virginia in about 1810. It was owned by a lawyer named William C. Williams. He was part of the elite of the city. This room is unusual because the woodwork in the room is made from mahogany. And that in itself tells a story about the room that for a long time we were kind of ignoring or not thinking seriously about. Mahogany was found in areas in the Caribbean like Cuba, Honduras, areas that were very tropical. These were often huge trees that would then be felled by a team of enslaved people. And it was sort of the it material that everybody wanted to have their furniture and even their paneling made from. We began to delve more deeply into the owner of the room, Mr. Williams, only to find that there were records of about 9 or 11 people he enslaved in the house. And then it also turned out he had a plantation outside of town with about another 40 enslaved people who were harvesting probably grains, but maybe also tobacco. So he was making money from the products of the labor of the enslaved people and then using it to buy more things that were available because of enslaved labor. So this is a room that speaks really loudly of slave labor, but was not something that we were discussing. This room looks very much the way it did when it was first installed in 1979. However, over time, our interpretation of the room has changed immensely.
The Calculative Curve is a permanent gallery installation of our premier 18th century American furniture. The American furniture collections served as a foundation of the 1909 Hudson Fulton exhibition, and again in 1924 when a formal building was established for American art. The furniture played a premier part of those installations. And it's incredibly important because it really served as the foundation of the American Wing's collections. But here we're really focusing on the art making, the brilliant process and manipulation of materials that the craftsmen and their collaborators operated in. And in addition to that, there were many others, including immigrants, people of color, and also women who were involved in the operational support within the workshops for these pieces. And so we're looking at furniture as we would, say, painting, sculpture, or other artistic media. These galleries really emphasize the departure in terms of design, the fact that there was almost no single straight line, that there were artworks that were conceived almost entirely of curves, and that they truly ascended in terms of their conceptualization and show the incredible talent that was coming in with artworks by people like Thomas Affleck, a Scottish immigrant craftsman who ended up in Philadelphia and produced some of the most amazing works in the 18th century. Furniture may seem like a utilitarian object, but in this case, we're really looking at them as sculptural artworks. These are things that were created in the round to have a certain presence and prominence within the settings that they were made for. They are removed from those settings, so we can really zoom in on all the brilliance in terms of their conceptualization, the design, and all of the craftsmanship that goes into their being.
When you enter the Paintings and Sculpture galleries on the second floor of the American Wing, you're going to encounter 3 new galleries. One focused on cultural identity, one focused on place, and one focused on temporalities or time, modernisms. And we're really excited about these galleries because this is allowing us to do just what we've been exploring, putting a very iconic piece that's been in the collection since the founding of the Wing in '24, like a stored portrait of George Washington, next to a new acquisition that shows an enslaved youth with a Van Rensselaer child from the 18th century. And what does it mean to actually represent race on canvas at this time in history? You will see familiar things that will lead you into those galleries, but when you're in those galleries, you're going to encounter some fresh works from different parts of the United States. One of the most popular galleries in the American Wing has always been the Gilded Age Portraiture Gallery, where we have some of our most important works by John Singer Sargent, especially the iconic Madame X. It's a very white gallery. They're all white sitters, produced by white painters. But we had an opportunity to work with a contemporary New York-based artist, French-born and trained, of Martinique descent, Elizabeth Colomba, whose practice is about thinking about those kinds of portraits. This is an artist who reveres the work of John Singer Sargent, but thinking about who's absent, who are not being represented on those canvases. So her practice has been to insert Black women into that type of portraiture. And this wonderful painting she did around the same age that Sargent painted Madame X is her response to Madame X. It's called Armelle, and it's actually a portrait of her cousin in a costume that she designed that's an allusion to what Madame X is wearing. So the addition of Colomba's Armelle in that gallery of very large, full-scale figure paintings and portraiture allows us to tell a very different story about that time period and shifts the conversation for the public.
This gallery presents masterpieces of the collection, really iconic, well-known works in a new context. It looks at the idea of empire and the United States' relationship to it across the 19th century and into the 20th century. These works of art all address these issues and ideas of power and control as the United States expanded its horizons into the American West, expanded into the Caribbean, and fought wars in Europe. Winslow Homer's painting, The Gulf Stream, is an iconic work in our collection. It's one of Homer's most important and ambitious paintings, and the first painting by Homer to enter the Met's collection. The painting depicts a lone Black figure adrift on a distressed boat on the Gulf Stream current. The sea is churning. There's a storm on the horizon. The boat is surrounded by sharks. Homer has created a scene of intense drama and ambiguity. Homer is inviting us to consider the perils and to be in this place of distress and concern for this protagonist. Homer paints this work in 1899, right at the end of the century, the beginning of the 20th century. And this is an important moment in American history. And that Homer centers this painting on a Black figure is extremely significant. When we look at it today, we see that Homer is touching upon themes and subjects that are so embedded in American history and that persist to the current moment. We still think about America's place in the world. We think about race relations, and I think every viewer brings their own perspective to this painting, and that's really how Homer intended it. This is Jules Tavernier's painting, Dance in a Subterranean Roundhouse, painted in 1878. It's Tavernier's most important painting. Tavernier has taken great care to depict the Elam Pomo people. And so this remarkable painting shows this important ceremony, the people's dance. And the dance itself was created post-contact with the white settlers, and it was intended to protect the people from this incursion to their land and to their community. There really is a remarkable and complex irony to this painting because Tavernier was commissioned by a San Francisco businessman, Tiburcio Parrott. Parrott was involved in mercury mining in California. And Parrott's mercury mine had a really terrible impact on this community, poisoning, polluting the waters of the nearby lake and the land here. An amazing detail in this painting is that Tavernier depicts Parrott right behind some of the Elam Pomo women. So he's documenting the exact thing that this dance is meant to protect this community from. This is a painting that when we acquired it in 2016 really transformed the collection and our ability to tell these complicated stories in new ways.
This gallery is called Art Worlds, and it's focusing on art produced in the post-Civil War years, which is an incredibly vibrant moment for American artists, both artists who were native trained as well as artists who were studying abroad in Paris and other European art capitals. They're studying together, they're socializing together, they're working together, they're experimenting together, they're working across media. And this is also a moment when women artists are moving very determinedly from amateur status to more professional status. We have artists like Winslow Homer, Thomas Eakins, Augustus St. Gaudens, names that are familiar, but we have, over the past few years, been collecting work by artists who are underrepresented, so women like Helena Decay Gilder, Edith Mitchell Prelwitz, and artists of color, for instance, Charles Ethan Porter.
This is a painting called The Elevated by Edith Mitchell, later Prelwitz, that she painted in New York between 1888 and 89. Mitchell is looking at French Impressionist painters, specifically Claude Monet, in that on-the-spot sense of really being present in the moment, the way the locomotive appears to be barreling towards you. The smell of the smoke, the sound of the engine, the smoke that's rendered in very quick strokes, almost looks like pastel, chalk-like. She really gets at that excitement and that buzz of urban life in the late 19th century. And to me, it says everything about the ambition, the vibrancy, the modernity that is the broad theme of this whole gallery.
As you step into the Art of Native America Gallery, you're immediately welcomed into a quiet, contemplative space. This is a permanent installation that is entirely dedicated to presenting Native American and Indigenous artworks of the United States and Canada. It features approximately 90 works from sovereign Native American Indigenous communities and nations that are distinguished regionally, materially, and aesthetically. 75 of the items are from the Charles and Valerie Diker collection and represent their generous gift and support of Native American art.
So within this gallery space, you can encounter everything from utilitarian items all the way through aesthetic works. They range from the 18th century all the way through the present moment. And so we really like to create this exchange between the historical earlier works with contemporary works that are created by contemporary and still living Native artists. Native American works, one of their biggest strengths are the stories they tell. They're wonderfully embodied with narratives. This is one of my favorite works in the Art of Native America gallery. It's a 19th century Anishinaabe belt cup that would have been worn on a belt loop or on a sash, and then used to drink water or perhaps scoop food at a feast or some type of community gathering. You have 3 beavers that are working together to build a dam, and that is represented by this large beaver that's in the center. This actually represents an Anishinaabe story where a giant beaver is creating a giant dam that then created the Great Lakes. Items like this beaver cup represent the wonderful sense of narrative that's embodied within these works, but also the very exquisite artistry, the care that Indigenous artists have taken to represent stories that are important to their communities. One of my main goals is to have Native American people or community members enter into these spaces and then feel represented here in this installation.
This is a magnificent window from the Tiffany studios, of course, founded by Louis Tiffany, one of America's most visionary artists who worked in many media but excelled in the medium of glass. The window was designed by Agnes Northrop, Tiffany's foremost women designer, whose specialty was landscapes and gardens, made for Sarah Cochran, a coal and coke magnate from Western Pennsylvania. It was then largely constructed and crafted by women called the Tiffany Girls, who had the demanding role of having to select each individual piece of glass, over 10,000 in this window.
It's certainly the new centerpiece of the American wing of the great Englehard court. This is such a not only now iconic piece, but really it's the scale, it's the beauty, it's the color, it's the light that really can transform an entire vast space with it.
And actually it really does feed very well into what we're trying to do overall in the American wing in terms of recognizing women artists who were critical but who haven't gotten the attention and the recognition that they deserve. And of course this window really epitomizes it in terms of the way women were involved in its conception, its design, and then constructed by women.
It also shows you the development of our understanding of American art. Who were the artists? Who were the participants? Who were part of the dialogue and the discourse? So all of that is basically coming together also, especially in this really outstanding work that now just entered the Met's collection.
The fact that we're able to install this right now, it, I think, is at a wonderful moment to celebrate the American Wing's 100th anniversary.
You can come to the American wing and you see, yes, the iconic works of Sargent and Homer, but it creates now a much more holistic, much more complex, much more exciting picture of American art.
And mirroring really what's happening in our society, these ongoing debates about who is American, what is American identity, what is American place. And those are issues we take on in this new reinstallation of the American Wing.
The opportunity to learn things about our past through artwork is all about nuance and complexity and allows us to better understand how we got to where we are today.
The Met is a museum of many different cultures, going across centuries, going across regions. It would not be complete without the history and the story of America itself.